Okay, so we'll do our opening prayer now. Om Amun Rabata. Om Amun Rabata. Om Amun Rabata. Om Amun Rabata. Heru Makeru. Heru Makeru. Heru Makeru. Heru Makeru. Pata Pata Netera. Pata. All right. So we've completed colophon 1, line 1, and we're halfway through colophon line 2. And then the second half of colophon line 2 introduces an idea or a lesson, a teaching. And so before we do that, I wanted to give an adjunct and a preparatory lecture to that. You're going to see a very significant glyph. Recall that in the Shabaka Stone, that the text itself, the stone itself is like a computer. And the text on the computer are bits of information. And each bit of information is a code, not like it's an encoded. So what we're doing is we're looking at each bit of information and we are deciphering its code. Because it's giving us some essential teachings into the nature of mind and consciousness. It has its mythological components and it has its mystical components. So we're dealing with a very profound philosophy. When the early Egyptologists found this document, and they started to decipher it according to their methods. One of the James Henry Breasted at the time, 1800, he was a very prolific Egyptologist at the time. He commented that the Shabaka Stone is the most important philosophical document that has ever been found. So, like I was telling Osarmat the other day, I don't want to rush it. I don't want to rush through the Shabaka Stone because of its the gravity of it. So we have to look at the bits, pieces of information, and go into it. And as you can see from taking a class, it's already very profound. So today we're going to have like an adjunct or an addendum to colophon 2. And hopefully next week get back to the text. It seems as if we're doing adjuncts and addendums this week. We did one last night for the para dua text. So we are in the second hypostyle hall of the temple of Osiris, Osar. And we're looking at a depiction of two divinities doing something special. You have on the left side, you have Khnum. He's sitting on a throne. And sitting on an identical throne on the right, you have Ptah. So you have Khnum and Ptah. And they are doing something to a personality. The personality is standing. Well, before we talk about that, you see here, Ptah is his throne is sitting on the pedestal of Ma'at. And there's a special feature to the pedestal. If you were in devotion this morning, then this symbol on the bottom that goes across the pedestal should mean something to you.
Yeah.
And Neb means what?
Lord of all.
All
I
right.
didn't know my microphone. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So Lord of all, and in this context, it means all. On each Neb, you have the three symbols, two identical and one different. You have two wasp scepters making bookends, and the Ankh symbol sits in the center of the symbol for Neb, and they go across the very bottom. And if we count them up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So you have 7 times 2. But before we get to the numerology is significant. But before we get there, the symbols was and was means the free flow of life. So all the free flow of life, all. So what it means is that this divinity and Ma'at, the free flow of life is contained within the influence of Ma'at, and the divinity is the one that operates on this mechanism to bring forth life and creation. And this same process has bring forth the phenomenal deity. Go on the other side. This is a deity Khnum. He sits on the identical throne and the identical pedestal of Ma'at with the identical symbology. Now, the person in the center, this is the potter's wheel. And the person in the center on the potter's wheel, one of the unfortunate aspects of this text is how degraded the texts are. You can hardly read any of it. But anyways, it's the royal child standing on a potter's wheel. But before we do that, let's do the numerology, because the numerology informs what's happening to the royal child. So you have 14, so you have 7 times 2. So you have, what it refers to is a duality. This process of ma'at that brings forth life is bringing forth life in a duality, a dual, there's a dual aspected nature. So you have the cosmic life and they have the terrestrial life. But in this context, it's referring to the physical life and the mental life, so the body and the mind. What supports that conclusion is the deities that are working and what they're doing. So it's a free flow of life that causes body and mind to come into existence. If we go back now, and so that's on both sides. So these two principles are operating synergistically. So it's a synergy. That means that there is a slight nuance or a slight difference, but there's a synergism. The deity and the personality in the center is a royal child, and this royal child is being formed, is being constructed. The body of the child is being constructed by Khnum and Ptah. Khnum is taking the clay and is forming the physical nature. So that's one of your 7s. Ptah is taking that same clay, but the subtle aspect of that clay, and is forming the mind, so the body and the mind. But it's being constructed through this principle of truth. So it's a rebuilding of a body, it's a reconstitution, a reconfiguration of a previously degraded form. So the degraded form is being rebuilt and reconstructed. How does this work for you? You might be asking. On the fundamental level, it works when you adopt a pure vegan diet, when you adopt a pure mental process. But if you were to gain entrance into the insight of body and mind, you would be reconstructing a more subtle body. So a subtle body, what this is referring to is that a subtle body is being constructed, a subtle form is being rebuilt, reformed. You follow? So this is the genesis, you can use that term, meaning the beginning of the spiritual journey. Right? You need to be reformed, you need to be reconstituted, you need to be reconstructed before you can take flight in another world. And then this form is going to be infused into a process that we already discussed, not in this class, but in last year's trip in the AEM class. So this reconstituted form is the form that now engages the spiritual process. We're going through the various avenues of spiritual evolution. Pata is holding a scroll in his left hand. So he's holding the history of the mind. And is infusing the essence of mind into the clay of the mind. And Kunum is infusing the essence of matter into the clay of matter. And so you have a reconfiguration of matter and mind, and a coalescing of the energies of spirit into the central form that is the vehicle for spiritual evolution. And this is what should be going on within you, within your heart, within your mind, your personality, or your life as a spiritual aspirant of the teaching, the philosophy. You have to think of it in terms of philosophy. Now, philosophy is not the ultimate truth, but philosophy, the teaching says, a teaching related to Lord Jehuti, says that you can't reach the heights of piety without philosophy. You know, piety without philosophy is limiting, and philosophy without piety is delusion. So you have to think of it, and you have to think of your life in terms of two aspects. You have to think of your life in terms of mythology. And you have to think of your life in terms of philosophy. If you think of your life in terms of mythology, then you would insert your personality into the myth. I think last year we had a long discussion about this in one of the classes, that you have to insert yourself into the myth. Yeah, a myth is not something that you just read and learn from. It is something that, saying that you make it a part of your life and all of that, doesn't really get to it. Is that you have to be inserted into the myth, you have to be inserted into the drama. And that's why you have the temples, and that's why you have the rituals. You're inserting yourself into the battle, the struggle, the glories to be won. So what that means is that you have to think of yourself as becoming a reconstituted spiritual form. You're rebuilding yourself. You're I remember when we were kids, my dad used to like to watch this show, The $6 Million Man, and in the trailer, it says we will rebuild him. That's how you have to think of yourself. That you're being rebuilt. You're not being rebuilt with biomechanical prostheses and things like that. You're being rebuilt and you're being reconstituted fundamentally by the philosophy, by the mythology, but more profoundly by the metaphysics of the spiritual evolution of a human being. And that can only take place with Shetty. That can't take place by reading and hanging out and watching lots of TV and not practicing. That can only take place by Shetty, that reconstitution of your body. You're going to see next week how all of this plays with the Shabaka Stone. You're going to see a little bit today. How can you expect to achieve higher consciousness in your present mind, in your present state of mind, your present form? It's not possible. That's why many people fail. Because they're trying to take their present psychological and physical disposition and trying to grow spiritually from there. They're not even thinking about inserting themselves in the myth. The myth is just something that you read to learn from. You learn a little bit of wisdom from it. But that's not what we're talking about. If we're talking about spirituality on a high level, you have to think of yourself as inserting yourself into the mythic process. And by doing so, there's something that happens to you that is spontaneous, that you don't control as a spiritual aspirant. And if you try to control it, it will turn into a preventative factor, is what I usually call them. A part of growing spiritually is letting go, and part is striving. You have to strive and let go of the process at the same time. So it's an art form that you have to develop in your personality. Yeah, how can you strive and not care at the same time? It's something you have to develop. It's something you have to learn. It's something you have to practice. But what gets you there is this reconstituting process. And the basis of that is insertion in a myth. And the reason why you want to insert yourself in a myth is because you want to align yourself with Ma'at, with truth. If you insert yourself in a myth, then this metaphysical process can take place. So like last night, we were talking about like last night, this lecture is not a basic lecture. This is like an initiatory type. You're not going to be talking this to just normal people, or even some aspirants are not ready to hear certain things. And the Kabbalion class is just getting warmed up. So if you're able to withstand the pressure, because you cannot grow without pressure. Good mundane example of this is they had an incident on Washington. You all might have heard about it, where a Native American man and a young European boy, they came in conflict with each other, and there are arguments on both sides. But what struck me is not all of that. People fall into conflict all the time. Was how it was handled in reference to the boy. He's like 16. And his parents hired a public relations firm to craft a response for him. And a Native American man picked up on this as well. And nowhere in there was where he took any responsibility for his part in the conflict. There was no apology. There was no, okay, maybe I should have moved and just let him walk around. I'm very remorseful. Nothing of that. And that in and of itself, if there are people like that. But what is striking about it is that he will not grow from that experience in a way that is very integrative. He may learn from it by having to experience it again and again, but he'll not learn from it in a very integrative way, because his parents and the adults around him are trying to make the experience and the fallout from it as easy as possible for him. That's the problem. And what he needs is a strong adult to set him straight, to acknowledge his side of the story, but also to offer firm counsel and instruction on how to be in a situation like that, and that's a problem when you don't have myth. If you don't have myth in your life, now how would you be able to understand the dynamics, or how would it be made able for you to understand the dynamics of that kind of human interaction? Especially for a young boy in relation to an adult, there's a copious amount of lessons for him as a young teenage boy to learn that will shape and affect the rest of his life in a very profound and positive way. Especially, and this is the other thing about the parents that's concerning, especially since he had the conflict with a Native American man who is, you hear him talk, he's talking about how he does his rituals, he does his performances, he does his prayers and things like that. And so there's a great opportunity there that is being lost. for that young boy to gain some true real life lessons. But if people are stuck in their ways and stuck in their racism, then all that can happen is that you live a life being a bigot. You don't learn anything. Why? Because of this idea of exceptionalism and supremacy. But more fundamentally, his parents are trying to make it too easy for him. And as parents, they're thinking that they're doing the right, they're sheltering their son from the world. But you can't always shelter your sons from the world. You have to teach them how it is in the world. And you can only do that by putting them in the world to experience it under your proper guidance. And that's what happens when you don't have myth. So that's the point. The point is that you can't grow without pressure. And that's how it is in spiritual life. You can't grow without pressure. And the pressure can come in many different ways. The pressure can come like in a class like this, the pressure can come intellectually. And in a class like Kabbalion, the pressure can come from the instructions of the teacher. And that's how it was in ancient times. You have a spiritual teacher, yeah, it's not, you're going to be told certain things. So the point is to insert yourself into the myth, to allow yourself to develop this new body, to develop this new mind. To develop this new principled way of viewing yourself and being. You have to allow these deities to operate on you, Khnum and Ptah. And when they operate, they infuse this process of life. So this is the jumping off point to immortality. And so from the perspective of the hero's adventure, this is a jumping off point into the realm of the unknown, the realm of the abyss, the realm of the conflict, the realm of the struggle upon which the glories of the soul unfold. But you can't go into that domain with the same body and mind that you have outside of that domain. That body and mind outside the domain needs to be rebuilt, reconstructed, reconfigured. You need a proper vehicle to go into that domain to receive the blessings from the deities. Actually, I wanted to make them a little bigger. They look bigger this way. Because here's something I want to point out. Okay. Current. All right, I think it's large enough that you can see. We're going to start left to right. So we're going to start on this end, if you can see my cursor. And we're going to start here. 1, 2, 3. So on this side, you see here, you have a recall. We just spoke about the dual nature of the construction of the body. So what you have here, and the people who took the AEM course, you know that you have a conduit, a metal conduit that comes over the brain that carries life force. So you have your physical conduits that carry your blood, your lymph, your uh, your corpuscles, and so forth. And what they're showing here is that this serpent conduit that comes over the brain, in some depictions, you see it as a single serpent that comes over the top of the brain from the base in the back. So from the occipital region to the frontal region, over the central sulcus that separates both hemispheres of the brain. Here, they're showing that you have two serpents coming up. And lodging at the front, raising up at the front. Between the eyebrows at the forehead. And so this is a central channel of serpent power. That's what we call it. Serpent power energy or life force. And so the reconstituting of the body doesn't make this happen. What it allows, it allows for the potential for this to actually occur. So the reconstituting of the body is the generation of a condition by which the potential for serpent power is created, is generated. And in this system, you have to think about it in a dual nature. So you have to think about two serpents coming up on the top of your head. And so the serpents coincide with the inner surface of the separation between the left and right hemispheres of the brain. So you have to visualize it and think about it that way. And what this is showing is that this energy system, once it starts to move, it moves in a serpentine manner. So it's a serpentine movement. Like it's not, the snake isn't just crawling straight, it's crawling in a wave-like pattern. And so this reconstitution allows it to the potential to occur. And when we do the text next week, you'll see how this is introduced in the text in a way. So the text not only going to substantiate it, but it's going to illustrate to you how to make this happen, or the process by which to make it happen. Now, in other texts, especially in the Pertemperu, it talks about how the serpent comes up and is perched there. And that's what this represents, is a female personality. And also, these are serpents. She's wearing a serpent crown on her head. All of these are raised serpents. So what it's showing is that along with the central conduit, that there is you have, here will be your fourth energy center, the level of your heart. Here would be your fifth, the level of your throat. And here would be your sixth. And what this is illustrating diagrammatically the seventh. But physiologically, it represents the flowering, or we call it the flowering, or the filtration of the sixth upwards. So here's your sixth. And then if you look at it from the perspective of the brain, you're having a filtration. If we're looking at it as a form of pure energy. So it's filtrating upwards. And so what's happening is that the brain is being saturated with the life force. The problem, the issue is how to make this happen in a way that does not create psychological problems and issues. In other words, we're talking about activation of life force. That's what should be going on. So the text talks about this in a specific way that we're going to discuss next week. Activation of life force. And that is entrance, and keep in mind, they're talking about this in the very beginning of the text. So what does that mean? If you think about that for a moment, and that's what we're going to discuss in detail next week. So these physiological processes are meaning that this is what the spiritual system is about. It's about to bring about these physiological processes. This is what the Shabaka Stone is about. So the Shabaka Stone is a machine that if you plug into it, these physiological processes can occur. That's what we're talking about. And that's what we'll be talking about next week. Okay, so that's what we have for this week. Are there any questions? No questions? Concerns? Thoughts?
Oja, where is the image of um the personality with the male personality? Where is that found?
It's a good question. I believe it's found in the British Museum in a collection of, they have a large collection of artifacts from the south, from Nubia. And you know, Nubia and Egyptian philosophies primarily the same when you're talking about these ideas. Like, so the Nubian dynasties came about. The first dynasties you could say were Nubian. And then the people stayed there a long time, so they became known as Kemetic. And then there was trouble, so armies from the south came down, and so to help, and so they started to be known as the Nubian dynasty. But it's all one civilization, really, from the south all the way to the north to the Mediterranean Sea. And the British Museum have a large collection of artifacts that's found to the south in Nubia. This is past Aswan. This is where you have the smaller type pyramids, where Amun was worshipped and so forth. So it's a Nubian artifact.
Dua.
Uchesehu, I have a question about the metaphysical process.
Mm-hmm.
When a spiritual aspirant adopts a vegetarian vegan diet and they're studying the philosophy and they're doing the Shedi practices, are they beginning the process at that time?
You mean when they first start doing the Shedi and start changing their diet?
Well, as they go forward and they do it over a period of time, does the process begin there, or does that, what I'm asking is, does intent and putting yourself in the mythology is where it's activated, or is it activated before then?
So, right, so it can be activated spontaneously if there is a sincerity, meaning the person has Aryu that actually causes the activation of the spiritual process to begin, as far as building and reconstructing the body. And that will be reflected in an unconscious manner in the behavior of the person. So they'll be able to adopt a vegetarian diet, they'll stop drinking alcohol, all of this kind of stuff. And then they'll start meditating regularly. And doing all of those actions are assisting in reconstituting the body. So the activation now becomes a process, a lengthy process. And once the body becomes built to a sufficient degree, then they can start the actual process of spiritual evolution. The evolutionary process is taking place on a long, but it's a very fundamental, very basic level. What you're trying to do is you're trying to get to the level where you're on the potter's wheel with Khnum and Ptah working on you. And for some people, it takes time to get there, but they're working towards that. Once you get to that point where Kunum and Pata are working on you, then you are in the process. What helps to facilitate that, if you psychologically insert yourself into the myth. And so you have to do that consciously. You have to do that with awareness and understanding of what it is that you're doing. So what I mean by insert yourself into the myth, it means that you mythologize your life. You live your life as Haru in the myth, going through this battle, this struggle, this conflict with the ego. So you posit it as an inner conflict. So you insert yourself into the myth internally. It's not something that you're doing outside in day-to-day life. It's what you're doing internally. And so you become Haru, going through the struggle in the mind. Not the struggle in the world is only a reflection of what is going on in the mind. So you turn the myth, you insert yourself in the myth by turning yourself inwards.
So when you speak of letting go, does that mean that as you're going through this process, the higher level of the process, you have to let your experiences go because you may have new experiences that are different than the one you've already experienced. And if you don't let them go, you can't reach those higher levels. Correct?
It's not only that, it's realizing that all those experiences are illusory. All those experiences are illusory. There's no use in holding on to them. But in the context I was speaking of, is that you may be a driven person. Oh, I want enlightenment, I want enlightenment, I want enlightenment. And that's good to a certain degree. But if you continue in that vein, that means you're clutching on to the idea of wanting enlightenment. You're clutching on to the idea of wanting higher consciousness, of wanting to grow spiritually. And all of those ideas, you have to let go of them, because although they are positive delusions, in a manner of speaking, they are also inhibitory. Wanting enlightenment prevents you from attaining enlightenment. You have to want it and let go. Want it to develop the Arya, and then let go so that you're not holding on to another concept. At a certain degree, at a certain point, you're not wanting it anymore so much like a strong desire for it. You develop a strong desire for it in the beginning, and that gets you started. If you hold on to that strong desire too much or too long, it prevents it from happening. So to attain enlightenment, you must let go of the idea of enlightenment. And that's the difficulty. That's the hard part.
Do it. That's it.
Okay. And that's why when you hear the lectures, you're constantly be told to practice, 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 because the practicing is what helps you to develop the capacity to let go. And so the spiritual teachers, they might say certain things that you disagree with, but if you disagree with those things and you don't heed the lessons, then enlightenment will be out of your reach, and then you just have to deal with life as it comes, I guess. I don't know, because I don't want to be in that situation. So you have to be able to try to understand what is being spoken. Like, for example, one of the hard parts is a spiritual teacher might say, don't have children. And a younger aspirant or even an older aspirant, so what do you mean don't have children? See, you're holding on, you're grasping, you're clinging on to something. As long as you hold on and grasp and cling, it will not be attainable. So you have to ultimately let go. And they might, spiritual aspirant might say, don't get into that relationship. But I love him, I care about him, or I love her, I care about her, I want to be with her. And then, so then why are you approaching a spiritual teaching then? What's the point? What are you trying to accomplish? And so these are the hard issues that aspirants have to work through within themselves, and it takes time. So in working through those issues, you can be working towards the point where you're rebuilding your body. You know, Kunuma and Pata was shown. You'll be working up to that point where you're rebuilding and reconstituting your body. And then when you're ready to agree with the teaching, it doesn't matter if you're in a relationship or not. It doesn't matter if you have a child or not. Because at that point, you realize that it's illusory, you have a mundane reality you have to take care of, but you're really not holding on. That's the point you're trying to get to. Yeah, anything that you lock onto in the world is going to keep you in the world. And that's the danger and the insidious nature of the ego. Dangerous for us and insidious for us. But for the worldly people, they like it. But if you purify and cleanse yourself and you look at that life, would you want that life again? That's the delineation point. And if you can say no with sincerity and honesty, and even if it presents itself to you, you will not have it again. If you say it's not a conviction, it's a realization. You say, no, I don't want that life again. Then you know that your body, your mind is being reconstituted sufficiently to go through the process that Pata is actually cajoling the soul to do. Pata is cajoling you through various unconscious mechanisms. It is how long you're going to hold on, how long you're going to fight against that, how long you're going to ignore it, which is your own ego doing that. So you might find yourself with the name Pata. Well, why does that happen? What's going on unconsciously, aware from your conscious awareness, that is compelling you and impelling you towards something higher. But if you're holding on, if you're clinging, if you're clutching, Pata has all the time in the world. And it will wait for as long as it takes for you to get it. So you find yourself coming to the teachings and so forth, which is good, which is all good. How would it be if you weren't coming to this class, but you were out doing something right now? You weren't even thinking. Think about how many billions of people in the world are thinking that right, or in that mode right now. At least you're here. So for you, it's a little more subtle, a little more trying. So you have to muster your energies and muster your Sheri day by day. Not forcing it, because again, forcing it is going to prevent it. In forcing it, something may happen. You may have a wonderful experience, but then you're susceptible to fall back down. So you'll be like a barometer, up and down. So it's actually an art form that you have to develop within yourself. You know, of all the billions of people in the world right now, you're the ones that are taking the Shabaka Stone class. So what does that tell you? Okay, anything else?
If we go to the website and purchase a Shabaka Stone book, can we get a digital copy of it?
Yes.
Do it.
I'm trying to go all digital anyway. I need to put out an email about that. Do I? All right, anything else? Okay, our closing check. Pata, 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 pata.
Do it. So,
Do it. Hit up.